Hello, I'm Mark Tucker,
Hi, I'm Alan Furstenberg,
and we are Two Voice Devs.
Two Voice Devs.
Welcome to the special anniversary episode of Two Voice Devs.
Happy anniversary, Mark.
Hey, same to you. It's been a few years or
Oh my
so.
God, it has been a few years. Yes, and I love that opening. That was a fun opening to do.
Yeah, good job on that. That was very good. Probably the only time I'll be in a hot air balloon.
It's it's some part of it is it's amazing to realize it's been 5 years, and part of it feels like just yesterday. It really does.
Yeah, it's gone by fast. There's a lot that's happened, but in some cases it seems like we were just chatting at a conference and like, hey, we should get together. Maybe we do a podcast or something.
And we've repeated this. I feel like we repeat this every year. It was Carol who finally said, pushed us to do it.
Yeah.
And said, just try it. Try it for a couple of episodes, see how it goes. If you make it to 10 episodes, you'll probably last a little bit. So Carol,
And it's on you, man. And thank you.
but thinking about the past 5 years, aside from just the great time it's been touching base with you almost every week
Yep.
and just chatting about this crazy industry that we seem to have found ourselves in. It's been a pleasure working with you. It really has.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. It's kept me on my toes. It kind of pushed me to take what I'm learning or doing and be able to distill it into a conversation. And we jump into a conversation not really knowing exactly where it's going to go and without really any preparation at all. And we just kind of see where it goes and we talk about it. And I think a lot of times we say, oh, this is going to be a short one. And then it turns out not to be.
Right, 45 minutes later, we're like, yeah, we're going to have to talk about this another time. Let me ask you something, and this just dawned on me. Did you expect this is where the industry would be 5 years ago? I mean, when we started 5 years ago, we were looking at Alexa and Google Assistant, and we were
Right.
we were kind of looking at, voice was going to be voice agents, and we were calling them voice agents, were going to be the big thing that was coming in, and we were going to be out front and helping people understand how to build those voice agents. From the minute details of how do you do authentication and how do you do content management to the bigger questions like, what is a voice operating system? And how do you get agents and how do you get agents coordinating with each other? And did you expect us to be here after 5 years?
No, it's been kind of interesting because the conferences we went to at that time used the word voice first. So we're going to really focus on that conversation. And you had conversation designers or conversation user experience designers, and in some ways it didn't really take off in the way that we thought it was going to. There were lots of millions and millions of devices sold on both the Alexa and the Google side of things, and lots of skills and actions built and integrations, and we pushed the envelope ourselves with different things of how it could work, and it didn't really take off. The on the Alexa side, the ecosystem kind of started shrinking with the capabilities. A capability would go away and it wouldn't be replaced,
And on the assistant side, it was clear assistant was just constantly losing features to the point where it was feeling like it was about to be shut down.
yeah, and then
And
in
then the
some ways some
world changed.
things and then a lot of things did shut down. Like I was working on projects that used Alexa's HIPAA compliant environment where you could do interesting things in the area of healthcare. and then that went away, and so it seems like it didn't really explode the way that we thought voice first was going to. But here we find ourselves still talking about some of the same things, but instead of deterministic conversation flows that we were, hand tooling before, now we're talking about more probabilistic generative AI LLMs,
Right. But I guess what I feel though is 5 years ago, 7 years ago, when we were, sitting around in things like voice lunch, or when we were having our
Yep.
meetings, or, we were talking about this vision, which you really, yes, what we were designing at that time was the stepping stone.
Yeah.
It was, we needed to build a single tasking conversational agent, because that's all we really had the capability to do.
Yeah.
But we saw that the vision was going to be that you just ask Alexa or you ask Google Assistant something, and magically it would book the reservations or make the phone calls or hail
Yep.
the taxi or play the game with you, or, just do these things without you consciously having to launch something. That it would have these new skills or these new actions
Yeah.
that it could just do.
Yep. New capabilities.
Right. And we're only now beginning to get there with a completely different technology.
True.
I feel like 5 years ago when we were talking about, when was it? I feel like it was around the time of one of the IOs, and it was probably IO 2019 or something like that Google was talking about how they were building very specific purpose actions. So you'd be able to do specific tasks through Assistant, and that we would build actions that hooked into those tasks. And I think my comment at the time was along the lines of, what are you going to do this for every possible thing that can be done?
Yeah.
And the response I was getting from Google was, yeah, that's our goal. And I'm like, that's pretty ambitious. I don't buy it.
That every interaction was a custom interaction, and you had to wait for somebody to wire up that interaction before it was available to use, and
Right.
very one-off. Everything was basically a one-off.
Everything was a one-off. And while on the Alexa side you had things like audio skills and radio skills, they were a specialized skill, a specialized type of skill. And I feel like that's where everyone was thinking 5 years ago. But with this grand dream that eventually we were going to map out all of those possible things that could be done. And then LLMs came along and kind of blew that out of the water.
Well, LLMs and tools, right? Because
Yeah.
without tools, LLMs was well, and even just with the LLMs themselves, with everything that they were trained on, large amounts of data, they were better at question and answering until you got to a point where they hallucinated. But
Which was immediately, but yeah.
yeah, but before, I remember there was a whole special group at Amazon where people would come in and answer questions, and those question and answer pairs were loaded into Alexa, so that it would know about what happened in the sports championship from just last week, or the Academy Awards that were coming up, or any of that modern stuff. It couldn't really scour the web and pull information and things like that. And now with the different ChatGPT and all the other chat models, it can crawl the web now and get more up-to-date information on what's going on. So it's interesting with even just the simple question answer stuff, how that's changed, and we finally getting to a point where you can ask pretty much any question, and paired with web search or web grounding, however you wanted to do it, then you can get those answers back.
Well, I think pairing it with tools in general, the fact that we have this concept of retrieval augmented generation, And that was a very quick thing that people started looking at. I mean, when we first started talking about retrieval augmented generation in like October 2023, it was this concept. We were trying to talk about the fact that using the LLMs to understand what people were talking about and turning that into a traditional sort of search query.
Yeah.
And now we're seeing more and more people just building stuff around that notion, and yet not adopted in quite the same concept. So now we think of it as back then we were talking about it as a discrete task, and now we're talking about it as, oh, it's just a tool. You have an MCP server that goes and does stuff for you.
Yeah.
And all of that in the course of a year and a half.
Yeah, it's definitely moving fast. And I remember when it first came out and we're like, we need to, this is how you do prompts and prompt engineering. And that is the thing that everybody needs to learn how to become prompt engineers. And it's just last week I'm seeing more and more is like, well, it's context engineering. It's, yes, the prompts are important, but it's not just the prompts. It's the short-term memory, the history and the state, and it's the longer-term memory, and it's the knowledge base, like the retrieval augmented generation stuff. It's what the tools are, which we've talked about. Also structured output. There's just a lot of things that go into figuring out where you can get data of different kinds to put into the whole process, giving it the context that it needs, whether it's personalization stuff about the user or more about the conversation that you're just having, or data, so that things can work out better.
What I find coolest, though, and you just said it, was that 5 years ago we were talking about how context was so important.
Yes.
How context was queen. And now everyone is talking about how important context is. It's it's neat to see how the concepts that we were talking about 5 years ago are still alive. And some of the details have changed. We don't talk about SSML much anymore for good reason.
Yeah.
For bad reason too. But we don't talk about APL, and we had a lot of sessions on APL.
Yep.
But now we're kind of trying to look at the bigger pictures and understand how do copilots fit into stuff, and how is Apple Intelligence fitting into things, and when are things local and when are things not local, and why.
Well, and there were plenty of frameworks we talked about. Like we talked about Jovo, we talked about Alexa Skills SDK. There are lots of different libraries and frameworks that we talked about, but it sure seems like not just one fire hose, but 2 or 3 fire hoses full of content that you can find. There are frameworks in all kinds of languages, and some of them are more bare bones, and like, this is how you can call a large language model via its API, or here's an SDK that wraps that and gives it agentic abilities, or here's one that like Crew AI, where you're defining agents and tasks, and it's figuring out what gets called in what order. So there's just lots of frameworks, lots of libraries, lots and lots and lots of models. Everybody's got a model, or 5 or 10, right? And
that's true. One of the things that was when we started, you were the Alexa guy and I was the Google guy.
Yeah.
And it was nice and easy.
yeah, it was pretty easy back then.
It's wonderful that we've had a bunch of guest hosts on.
Yep.
Talking about, not just different models and different companies, but different libraries and different tools and different perspectives. And while that is wonderful, it's a lot.
Yeah.
I don't know how anybody keeps up on it. I don't.
Yeah, there is definitely a lot. And even kind of going back on another topic of like the things that we've talked about, that even though things have in some ways have changed, it's still important to understand the basics of it. Like we talked about, the basics of how do you get a voice assistant to wake up and and start doing something. So you got wake words, you've got speech to text. You have some NLU, natural language understanding layer. You've got the routing, and you've got the actual handling and processing of the content, calling the APIs for integration. And then finally, it's the output side of things and the text to speech. All of those things are still there. It's just that sometimes the LLM can do a lot more than the code was before, right? So the LLM's taking this spoken or input text and figuring out what you meant, and you don't have to code up all the different possible intents and utterances and prompts,
Right,
but you do have to still get that same type of information.
But it's interesting how at the same time we've gotten away from intent-based and phrases mapping to intents. And yet again, we still have this kind of intent-based structure
Yeah.
through tools and MCPs and declarations and APIs like that. And we still have limitations. Most LLMs these days really can't handle more than like 10 or 20 functions. Whereas, back when we were building things with Alexa and Dialogflow, we were getting 100 different things that it could do, different sets of phrases. Not phrases, but sets of phrases.
Yeah, different intents, yeah.
So it's interesting that we haven't, in some ways we haven't gotten there yet. And in other ways we're beginning to duplicate the ideas in a new way.
Right. And in some ways it is a complete brain flip in the fact that, we're used to, as developers, coding things very deterministic. Same inputs, same outputs, right? But then we'd also have to like program in variation with the output so it didn't just sound like it was always canned responses.
Robotic.
Like the first time you might do like a little bit more verbose of an explanation on output, but the subsequent times, so kind of those customization of the outputs where now you already get some of that built in with just the variation that you get from the generative AI.
Right, but what's interesting is how much time and effort we spent in trying to figure out the right ways of doing that and helping people understand the right ways of doing that. And in some ways we still are.
Yeah.
We still are trying to figure out, how do we help people understand that when you are understanding what a person has said, you want something that is very deterministic. You want to try to capture that as well as possible. But when you're replying, you want to be a little more flexible. You don't want to lie. You don't want to hallucinate and make stuff up completely. But you do want to introduce that variant. And that's something that people are still wrapping their heads around.
Yeah. Well, and like we talked a little bit about intents. In fact, that everything had to be intense gave you some specific guardrails. Your chatbot would not talk about anything that you did not have a coded intent for, and you got the "I'm sorry, I don't understand what you're saying," or repair the conversation. Say this bot or I, depending on if you're giving it a personality, can handle these things. Try saying this. As now it kind of gives it's more open, right?
It's more open, but that means that in order to have those guardrails, and you still want those guardrails, you need to build them yourself, and you need to think a lot more to make sure we don't have prompt injection attacks, or people who are trying to circumvent your system instructions, or get access to things that they're not supposed to access as part of your framework.
Yeah.
It in some ways makes some things a lot easier. I don't need to play Wizard of Oz and detail my conversations and make sure I capture all variants of a phrase. But at the same time, I now need to anticipate how people may try to circumvent my system.
Yeah.
And that's a lot harder to handle.
Yeah. And as developers, we need to think about, well, the LLM can do a lot for us, but should the LLM be doing this for us? So should we have some sort of a preprocessor that kicks them into some alternate flow if it doesn't fall within certain guardrails of what to talk about? And that could be some other system that's not LLM based at all that determines.
Or maybe it is.
Yeah, it could be too, or it could be a small language model.
Right.
That's fine. That's specially trained for that purpose. So there's still plenty of decisions to be made, and architectures to flush out and figuring
And
out how to do this.
right, and all of this is coming at a time when there's this vibe coding,
Yes.
you know, attitude that's out there. And I said this a number of times over the past few years. I'm sticking to it. The notion that we're going to be able to program in English or the human language of your choice won't happen until people can properly express themselves in that language, which, as any project manager will tell you, is never. The role of a programmer is not to write code. It's to get the system to do what you want it to do.
Yeah.
And whether that's through code, whether that's through text code, whether that's through visual code, whether that's through a human language, it's all coding, but you still need to specify things correctly. Yeah. And that's not going to change.
Nope. I don't see that it's changing at all. And we had a really good conversation that we see that as more senior developers, that we can be more efficient using these tools to help us do our job, because we still are critical and we have the experience where we can say, okay, that's garbage, or that doesn't, this, I want to nudge this design in this direction for a specific reason, and
right.
Things like that. So,
and both the episodes that we've had, the past several weeks, along with current events over the past several weeks, I think have been bearing that out more and more. That, AI as a tool in the hands of people that know how to use that tool will help you do amazing things. And AI as a tool in the hands of somebody who does not know how to use that tool will give you the appearance of great things for a little bit, and then will cause trouble.
Yeah, that'll be then the fun debugging begins. That developers have spent thousands of hours
debugging or data recovery or lots of other stuff.
So I guess where do you see things going in the near term? There's lots of announcements of different things that are happening and different devices and frameworks and capabilities, but what do you think?
I mean, I feel like in some ways we are plateauing, which I think is good. Having a little breather will be nice. I think there are still tools to be defined and built and understood, and better notions of how we put these things together. I think we are starting to get into the agentic era. Let me try that again. Starting to get into the agentic era. We are starting to get into the age of agents. But I think we don't fully understand what that means. Yeah. And I don't think we have the tools fully in place to do that well yet. We're just starting to. I think things like, the agent development kit from Google. I think that's a noble start, but I think there's a long way to go before it really helps people build real agents. And, there's a lot of talk about agent-to-agent protocol, and I think that sounds cool.
Yep.
But I haven't really seen where that really plays out well yet. I haven't seen that good example yet.
Yeah.
So I think a year from now, maybe we'll have some clarity on that. Maybe,
yeah. Well, and there's lots of things that are interesting that's happened, like, just last 6 months, model context protocol. But then there's we've got some middleman attacks that are hitting that. You've got this new capability with OpenAI where agent mode or beast mode, what do you call it? It's got virtual machines and it's running code, and you're giving it access to do different things. Guess what? If you give it access to get all your information, then somebody can spoof or hack and get all your information. there, there's warnings like this is capabilities, but there be dragons there. Be careful what you do. And I think there's got to be a lot more that's talked about, and security guardrails in place with the things that are just kind of out of the box, has those capabilities, built in.
So two things there, all of which I agree with you completely.
Yeah.
I think you're right. We're going to be talking, at least I hope we're going to be talking more about security over the next year. I've already started seeing podcasts talking about agent security popping up. More and more people are talking about it. The episode that McCall and I did about security with MCP servers, I think was good, not just because it highlighted the specific issues that were raised, but kind of started talking about the bigger issues of what's going on.
Yep.
And what's needed. I had a conversation recently with some people about security in general, and I said I don't see it right now in these systems, and there are some people talking about it, but not enough. And that was one. And the second, I think, you're looking at things like MCP servers, and everyone was like, MCP servers, they're the savior. I think they're a small step.
Yeah.
I think maybe 2 years from now, I'm not sure it'll happen in the next year, but maybe 2 years from now, we'll look at MCP servers and laugh, because they pointed out the next step that we needed to make, but you couldn't do it with an MCP server itself.
Yeah.
And I think it's going to point out more and more of the deficiencies we have in our models. Our models can't handle 100 tools. We can't just hook up every MCP server in sight and have it expect to work correctly. It won't work.
Yeah.
My personal opinion is that what we're going to start having are these more dynamic tools, so that instead of defining all your tools up front, we'll now have models that know when to load in certain tools and when not to, when to make some active and when not to. And then there's the whole question of, okay, what's this all going to look like on iOS and Android and Android XR and Alexa? And as we start getting into platforms beyond the chatbot, what is it going to look like again? And that comes all the way around to where we were 5 years ago.
Yeah. Well, and then like even new devices, OpenAI is talking about their device, which is going to be a microphone and a camera that's on 24/7 and is recording everything in your life, so that you can get access or win the argument with your friend who said, no, you said it was this 2 days ago. But there's already devices that tried. I don't even remember some of the names of the devices that. The Rabbit, I think, was one of them.
We had 3 episodes or so talking about the Rabbit and action models.
Right, but there's other devices like Amazon is scurrying to buy Bee, which is a kind of wrist wearable, or it could be on lapel as well. That's just a microphone, always listening type of thing. There's 2 or 3 other of those that I've seen in the news recently. So, what are these devices going to look like, and how are they going to interact with them?
Well, yes, and what is the developer story for them? Because
Yes.
it's great to say we've got a device that will be listening and will be able to answer your questions, and that's wonderful. But how do I ask a question about my spreadsheet? How do I give it a command related to my home automation or whatever somebody dreams up? That was, I think that was what was so wonderful about what we were doing in the Alexa Google Assistant days, is that we weren't saying this is a program. We were saying this is a platform.
Yeah.
And I think you and I were there to help people navigate this platform. We don't have that platform yet in the AI world. We're getting there. Somebody could argue that MCP is that platform. I don't think so. I think it's, two steps before that platform. But we don't have that platform yet. And I hope that we are there when we do get to, when those platforms do start coming out, that we can help people navigate how to build for them.
And I see ourselves talking in the future about right sizing the models, about like, so you don't need the big Ferrari model to do everything. If you need a simple classifier or even maybe tool calling, you don't need the cost, because we have news stories that are starting to come out like, well, if we were to actually charge what it's going to cost to use some of these code IDEs that have integrated LLMs in them, then our developers going to be willing to pay that. Is the cost really at a point where it makes sense to have a developer use those tools full time? Other financial things that are interesting in the market is OpenAI itself is selling consulting services. So not only are they selling APIs, but they're also selling consulting services. And so, what are the reasons behind that? What signals does that send to the industry? And is some of the hype starting to slow down? And now we're getting to the point where we really need to deliver on this, which was a point that we hit with all the voice first stuff. Was there was lots of hype, lots of action, lots of fun things going on. But then, what's the result? Are we going to be able to see that return on investment? Is that automation of different workflows in business, in personal lives, really going to happen with agents this time around? And what's the cost and security implications for those? There's a bug in the system.
There's a bug in the system. No, those are excellent questions. And I think seeing how much of this is going to get pushed local. One of the things that always frustrated people about Alexa and Assistant was that they were, yes, there was a local device, but most of the stuff worked in the cloud. And that was there for, economic purposes. Having a machine, you needed a several $100 machine locally in order to do a lot of that voice work. How much of that is true now? It's true to some extent still, but it's changing, and it's changing quickly in some cases. Some of the smaller local models can truly run locally.
Yep.
On a completely different element. I think one of the other things that I've liked about the past 5 years is not just is seeing that we're using this technology in so many different ways.
Yes.
So we. I would talk a lot about how I'm using it for personal productivity. How, what Voodoo Drive and talk with your spreadsheet. And you would talk about the games that you were writing and building and how you were doing so and the toolkits to do that and what was necessary. Now, we talk a lot about the large language models, but we're also talking about, well, what is image input add to that conversation? What does image output add to that conversation? Our opening sequence today, how we couldn't have done that. I couldn't have done that 5 years ago.
Yeah, video is,
Right. But also, just the fun and the community. I think one of our most popular episodes remains the 12 Days of Voicemas, which was our Christmas episode back in 2022. And that was great. It was great getting the entire community together and contributing to this. And it was fun. And I think that's one of the things we need. It's easy for me to forget sometimes, and I'll admit this.
Yeah.
That, if I just see, I often mock people who are, give me this answer in the form of a haiku that a pirate would say. I just miss that. And I just miss that a lot. But it is fun. And these things they're allowed to be fun. We can have fun with them.
Yeah, it's the community, the tools, the learning, just the technology. All of these are reasons why I keep doing this podcast. And a big part, just get to talk with you on a regular basis and explore what you're thinking and kind of, share some of the things that I've learned too. So those are, I think we've got lots to talk about still. This is not going away.
We are not going away. It is good to hear because it's always refreshing having these conversations with you, having these conversations with other members of the community, getting these wide, sets of perspectives, and trying to get it out almost every week.
Yep.
It is a special part of my week to have these conversations with you.
Thank you.
So yeah, lots more to talk about. And we will be talking about it hopefully for at least another 50 episodes at Two Voice Devs.
It's Two Voice Devs. Thank you, Ellen.
Thank you, Mark. Happy anniversary.
Yep, same to you. Thanks for being such a good friend.
Thank you.
Cut! That was excellent. Congratulations, gentlemen.